everybody, good morning. This morning, or the other morning, I read in the LA Times that they are starting to demolish the Los Angeles County Museum of Art to build a new, very controversial new museum. But having been a docent at LACMA for 16 years, it reminded me of some stories of my experiences there. And I thought I would share them. How did I get to LACMA in the first place? Well, I was with a fellow zoo docent and we were going to give a tour of the zoo and it was pouring rain. And so we said, let's go to LACMA, and we did. And the docent there said, we're recruiting docents. And my friend, who was an art history major at UCLA, said, oh, they'll never take you. I was a biology major in college, but I thought, I'll try, I'll give it a try. Well, they did accept me, and 16 years later, I stopped giving tours at LACMA. And I thought to give a few little stories about some of my tours might be fun for the people here, most of whom have probably been to LACMA over the years. My favorite tour was the King Tut exhibit. And I have to tell you, being a docent at a place like LACMA is a great privilege. You are wonderfully trained. You have months of classes and lectures by curators and by experts, and so we have a lot of experts to everything in Los Angeles, both in academia and elsewhere. So we were wonderfully trained, and to learn more about King Tut up close and personal and how he lived over 3,000 years ago was a real treat. It was at some point I was in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, in Tut's tomb, and I happened to be by myself. I don't know how that was, but I had it all to myself. And I was standing there looking down on the mummy, and I realized that King Tut was there. I didn't realize that until that moment. He has since been moved. They've built a new museum for his artifacts. And I wonder how he and the other pharaohs would feel about being moved, because as you know, they felt that our physical presence wasn't what was important. What was important was our everlasting soul. And they made themselves these famous and wonderful tombs to protect their soul. So there I was, looking down, realizing I was communing in person with King Tut after 3,000 years. Another wonderful tour that I was able to do was a special exhibit on the ancient Greek art, Latin art of Pompeii. And our instructor was the ancient Greek art curator at the Getty Villa. And we had wonderful classes, and we got to look at the artifacts up close and personal. We never took to touch anything, but he would tell us things that I at least never, ever would have seen on my own. Another interesting tour, and these are all visiting tours, not LACMA's permanent collection, but another wonderful tour that they had at LACMA was on Genghis Khan. And since I've been here at Montecedro, we've had another tour to a Genghis Khan exhibit at the Reagan Gallery. And they might have as well have been two completely different exhibits. The Reagan exhibit sort of emphasized how brutal Genghis and his boys were as they traveled through the East. But the LACMA exhibit, they had their swords and their knives, which particularly the boys and the men were very interested in. We girls weren't too interested in those, but they had beautiful art. The thing I remember particularly were the ancient Persian miniature paintings, which showed you, they were very small, and they showed you how the people lived in Genghis Khan days 800 or 900 years ago. One of the biggest challenges I ever had in my years at the LACMA was every tour or every exhibit, we were evaluated, and it was very important, to me at least, I think to all of us, that you did well on your evaluations. And I had a group to evaluate. They were all women. I knew they were Muslims because they had on scarves, but it wasn't long before I realized they didn't speak a word of English. And I was being evaluated. And what do? I had my script, that I was supposed to use. And I don't know what I did, but I did okay, because I think I used a lot of body language for this tour. The last little vignette I'll talk about is when a very famous painting by an artist called Gustav Klimt came to LACMA. I had never heard of him, and the reason that this famous painting called A Woman in Gold was at LACMA is that this painting had been stolen by the Nazis during the Second World War, and his great niece was the inheritor of it, and her attorney was Rudolf Schoenberg, of the grandson of the composer, and he tried her case many times in Austria, and they never would buy that it belonged to this woman. And he had never taken a case to the Supreme Court of the US, and he did, and he won, and The Woman in Gold came here. It is possibly, it's hard to say when you're talking about a work of art, but it's perhaps the most beautiful painting I have ever seen in my life. And I went to Vienna in order to see it, and some of the other Klimt paintings. But when Maria Altmann was the woman's name, when she inherited it, it wasn't the kind of painting you could just put over your mantle. You needed a castle or a mansion to put it up in. So, and to pay the insurance, she had to sell it. And for a number of months, it was at LACMA, while a buyer was found, because LACMA could not afford it, unfortunately. It is now in New York. And if anyone ever goes to New York, you might want to go see it, because it is truly a beautiful, beautiful painting. Well, why did I leave LACMA? Because it was such a great experience for me. They changed the way they did their tours, and the curator who was doing the training was, in my opinion, terrible, and in most of our other docents' opinion, she was terrible, and she was subsequently fired. But I also was beginning to think about coming to Montecedro, and it's too far to commute from here to LACMA. I'm still a docent there, and I do occasionally go to lectures there once the museum opens, but that's going to be a number of years before the new museum opens. But I decided to bring my docent activities closer to home, and so now I give tours when we're back in business at the Huntington, as well as the Gamble House, and always the zoo. My favorite is the zoo. And if anybody wants to come to one of those places with me, if we're ever back in business, I'll be happy to take you. At the Huntington, they are doing it's finished now, a very interesting conservation on Blue Boy, which is not their most valuable painting, but it's their most popular painting. And it's been over a 2-year project getting it restored. And of course now Blue Boy's locked up just like the rest of us. But when the time comes and the Huntington opens again, or the zoo, or the Gamble House, I'd be happy to take anybody there. But to go to the Huntington, the Blue Boy will be in the Grand Manor 18th Century Portrait Gallery, and our local expert on that is Nancy Burroughs. So you won't want to go with me. You'll want to go with Nancy, who was a docent there for 40 years. So those are my little vignettes about LACMAs, and we will never know LACMA as I did, because it will never be back. So thanks.